Minister of Alberta Human Resources and Employment. Mr. Currie joined the public service following a 25-year career with the Edmonton Police Service. During that time, he served in a variety of progressive leadership, including command of the Human Resources and West Divisions. Mr. Currie's educational background includes a Master of Industrial Relations degree from Queen's University, as well as preparation in the Executive Strategic Management from the John F. Kennedy School of Government, Harvard University, in conjunction with the Police Executive Research Forum. He also holds a senior professional in human resource design. Now, this isn't on the bio, but I've been on the Labor Relations Board for a number of years, and Yuli also was on the Labor Relations Board, and that makes him one of us for sure. Please help me welcome our distinguished guest, Mr. Ulysses Currie.
Thanks, Michael. Good morning, everyone. As you get more and further away from your past positions, they start deleting them from your bio, so that's what happened to the Labor Relations Board. I think it's gone, but I'm pleased to be here this morning and bring greetings on behalf of the Alberta government. But just listening to the bio, and I just was telling an interesting story at the table before I came up this morning. I just came back from a trip to Siberia, and that's a standing joke now. I was sent to Siberia by my minister, but that's another story altogether. But I was there in Siberia and at the Northern Forum General Assembly. And I went out for my run the first morning I was there and realized there was a person driving across on the other shoulder as I was running. And then I realized everywhere I went, I had this shadow. I'll call him my shadow now, and he was a big shadow. And I couldn't understand this. Like, I thought times had changed in Russia, in the new Russia. And so finally, after about a day and a half of my shadow, and actually I tried to take a picture of him with my BlackBerry, and that almost cost me my arms and legs. I had to put it in my pocket, and he wanted it from me. So I finally asked what's going on, and they couldn't make the connection. They said, you were 25 years a police officer, now you're a deputy minister in Russia. They said, you're not a deputy minister, you're here for nefarious reasons. So that was their reason behind it. So they couldn't make that connection. So I had to explain that to lose my big shadow in Russia. But it was quite astounding what's happening there. And let me tell you that what I saw in Russia, right on the edge of Siberia, in a town of 42,000 that sprung up in 15 years. It's a brand new town of 42,000, 15 years old. It's all oil and gas. And it's just, you could shut your eyes and listen to their problems. Other than the different design and so on, you can hear Fort McMurray, you can hear Alberta, you can hear Grand Prairie. So we're facing some similar issues across the world. We talk about global problems. We have some global issues ahead of us. First of all, though, thank you to the Congress Board for your outstanding work. This is a unique organization. Again, we were talking about that at our table, bringing together business, labor, government, health, education, varying points of view, so that those varying points of view allow us to grow. I think that's really important for the Congress Board to continue on and having those various points of view. So as you know, at the end of 2006, with the new Premier, of course, we had a new Premier, new Cabinet, and a new ministries organized for the government, and Employment, Immigration, and Industry is one of those new ministries, and we dropped from 24 down to 18. And this ministry inherited parts of the Human Resources and Employment, Advanced Education, Agriculture, Economic Development, Tourism, Parks, Culture, Recreation, as well as Intergovernmental Affairs. So it was a huge ministry. We even got women's issues added to us as well, and so people are asking us, what does EII stand for? And I can say this because it's the minister's joke, everything Iris was interested in, and that was EII. So that's her joke, so I'm safe saying that. So, but I also noticed in the room today, there's many department employees and staff here in the room today. And quite frankly, I get to be the person that's speaking about their accomplishments. And so really before I get going, I just want to say thank you to my staff. I know there's 10, 12, 15, 20 of them. I just want to say thank you very much to the staff of this department. Thank you. So last year we saw continued unprecedented growth in the province, of course, one of the strongest ever recorded in Canada. $90 billion in exports, $75 billion in investment, a record low 3.4% unemployment rate, and 86,300 new jobs. We're a magnet for investment capital worldwide, and on a per capita basis, investment in our province is more than double the national average, and that's predicted to continue. A really exciting time in the province. I think we all know that. But of course, with our fast growth comes increased opportunity, but also very stiff challenges for us as well. And of course, these challenges are related to ensuring that Alberta's people, businesses, and industries continue to thrive. And that's what we're here about today, is to continue that thriving together. So what does this include? Changing and increasing competitive global landscape. I just referred to that. This is a global issue for us. An overall aging of our population. Expected strong economic growth and a tightening labor market that we're in right now. Increased urbanization causing regional labor and skill shortages in many rural communities. We're starting to see a very defined urban-rural split happening. Rising education requirements for many jobs, highly technical jobs, and a population that's falling behind other provinces in post-secondary attainment. I don't like to say that. That's sad to hear. Low graduation and post-secondary transitional rates, as well as low credentialing rates, things that we need to change. And that's not because we're doing things wrong, in my opinion. It's just the fact that the growth is so fast. How do we keep up, and how do we keep ahead of the curve? These are realities that I'm sure all of you in the room are keenly aware of. And everyone's heard this figure, but we're predicting to 2016. I know that the format was for 2020, but 109,000 workers short in Alberta by 2016. My colleagues in BC are saying 1 million. So we're right on the edge of even something larger. We have 170 occupations that we call under pressure now in Alberta, 170, and they're needed on an ongoing basis. So that's what we're facing right at this point in time. At the same time, we've all heard this, housing costs are up and supply is down. And we have a little bit of a flat spell right now, but it still hasn't changed the rents. Rents in Edmonton, Calgary, and elsewhere in Alberta are rivaling Toronto and Vancouver. Very, very expensive to live in Alberta, and we're seeing the effects of that as well. Families, individuals, are feeling the strain of short-staffed workplaces, working overtime, and just generally trying to get things done in a real busy life. And I think we all experience that as well. I certainly do. Over 93% of respondents in a recent consultation indicated that addressing labor force pressures should be a high priority for the Alberta government and partners. And of course, we've listened to that, and we are continuing to work on those pressures. We need to continue and create a dialogue around Alberta on how we deal with this. So today what I'd like to talk to you about is our government's role in transforming Alberta's workforce. We're actively taking some steps to address the pressures Albertans are feeling. Some of our policy decisions have focused on a need for industry to adopt more advanced technology and best practices, and that's coming along as well. Also, significant improvements in labor productivity would serve to reduce the province's labor shortage issues and secure long-term economic growth. Again, that's productivity is very, very important. I've heard some figures, I'm not sure how accurate they are, but I understand that if you took out oil and gas from productivity in Alberta, that we're one of the lowest in the country in terms of productivity after oil and gas is factored out. So we have to enhance productivity to help employers to engage their employees, strengthen the bottom line, and better serve customers. And I'm not just talking about doing more with less. When I say productivity, I'm talking about innovation. I'm not telling working people to death or getting people working 16 hours a day. It's how do we work better and smarter. And of course, we have to acknowledge the fact that workplaces are changing just as fast as the work is changing. Today, there's a need for employers to provide more flexible work environments, create welcoming work environments for underrepresented groups, and find new ways to engage and retain employees. And again, we're all facing this together. Employers in all sectors are looking for ways to attract and retain staff so that proper work-life balance can be achieved, and all Albertans can benefit from a strong economy. I'd like to talk about the things the government is doing to adapt to Alberta's changing reality, starting with building and educating tomorrow's workforce. Building and Educating Tomorrow's Workforce, we call it BETW, is government's 10-year plan of action to build Alberta's workforce. BETW is a joint effort among government ministries, industry, education, training providers, and labor, and it gives us the tools we need to adapt to and meet new labor force challenges. One of the things that's most satisfying about this group is we brought together a Deputy Minister Industry Labor Advisory Group, and we said, listen, we can quarterback this, but we need the sectors to step up to the plate. And I'm really, really pleased to say with what I'm going to tell you here that they really have. And it's been a great committee and a great group to work on because things have gotten done. We've invested $235 million in this strategy this year, and it focused on 3 main goals. And they're very simple goals: more workers, better trained people, and innovative work environments. So keep it simple, and that's what we did. At a forum in Edmonton earlier this month on October 9th and 10th, we released the Building and Educating Tomorrow's Workforce 2006-2007 Performance Update. Some of the highlights I'd like to share with you right now. We expedited the process for bringing in temporary workers through the Canada-Alberta Working Group. The group was established to review and change processes, and their work includes how to hire foreign worker seminars and establishing an Alberta temporary foreign worker hotline to respond to inquiries by employers and foreign nationals. Now again, some concerns have arisen around rights of foreign workers, and we've taken that seriously. I'd like to commend the Alberta Federation of Labour for them bringing forward some people to help work on temporary foreign workers' rights, and also we're continuing on by establishing shortly a temporary foreign worker advisory office that hopefully will be co-funded by the federal government, again, to look after our foreign workers here in Canada. We implemented earlier this year the Alberta-British Columbia Trade Investment and Labour Mobility Agreement, called TILMA. The agreement will remove interprovincial commerce barriers and result in greater movement of skilled workers across provincial barriers. And the work continues on TILMA as well. And in fact, there's interest, from what I understand, across Canada in TILMA. We've addressed labour shortages in the trades through increased promotion of the Registered Apprenticeship Program, called RAP. High school students can become apprentices and earn credits toward their apprenticeship program and high school diploma at the same time. In 2006-2007, a record 355 high school graduates were awarded RAP scholarships worth $1,000 each. We registered more than 23,000 new apprentices between 2006-2007, bringing the total number of apprentices being trained to over 60,000 now in Alberta, a great number that we want to keep growing. We increased the affordability of post-secondary education by creating new and expanding existing scholarships and bursaries for students. We increased accessibility and quality of post-secondary education by investing an additional $250 million into the Access to the Future Endowment. It provides seed money for innovative and collaborative post-secondary projects, as well as matching grants for donations to universities, colleges, technical institutes, and other post-secondary institutions. We encouraged the establishment of more welcoming communities and workplaces. We awarded approximately $850,000 in grants to reduce racism and discrimination in communities, organizations, and workplaces. We're also collaborating with industry on individual sector strategies under Building and Educating Tomorrow's Workforce that address specific labor force needs. The retail, tourism and hospitality, manufacturing, and energy strategies have been released already and outline numerous best practices and initiatives for those sectors. And these strategies were developed by the sectors themselves, which I think is the beauty of these strategies. It's not government saying this is what you should do, it's the sectors themselves saying this is what will work for us. The retail strategy, for example, outlines how to attract high school students, stay-at-home parents, and mature workers. These groups may be looking for flexible work hours or opportunities for social interaction. The manufacturing strategy continues to advocate streamlining, expansion, and modifying the temporary foreign worker program so more temporary foreign workers can come here and stay longer. The construction strategy will be released in Sherwood Park on Wednesday, October 31st. So that's just coming up next week, and we're really excited about the construction strategy coming out as well. It's also expected that strategies for the not-profit and voluntary sectors, as well as healthcare, will release shortly. As a matter of fact, I was just returned from speaking with my colleagues in British Columbia and the federal government in British Columbia, and a health workforce splits, especially around nurses. I think everyone saw in the paper today the shortages that we're experiencing, and so we're getting actually some help from the federal government and blitzing around the world with respect to finding nurses for Alberta at this point in time. Again, it's collaboration between businesses, sectors, other levels of government that are making this work for us. The transportation, logistics, and forestry and logging sectors are also releasing strategies in the future as well. So we're trying to cover all the major sectors here in Alberta. And one thing I'm really, really pleased about, there's also a separate plan that focuses on First Nations and Aboriginals to address their specific employment training needs. Next year's priorities and actions include implementing the Made in Alberta immigration strategy, supporting increased settlement services, and increasing access to post-secondary programs, including apprenticeship participation. Now, a little special area I want to talk about just briefly, recruitment and retention. Again, this is a real issue for all of us, including government, recruiting people and keeping people. With more people retiring and fewer workers entering the labor market, employers must be creative as they look for ways to attract workers and keep them engaged in Alberta's labor force. We're talking about addressing broader quality of life issues that make people want to stay in the workforce. Enhancing infrastructure, providing community supports, improving work-life balance, and removing barriers to employment are all things we should be looking at right now. We also must find ways to engage underrepresented labor groups, including people with disabilities, women, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. Where just 1/3 of Aboriginal people in Alberta obtain post-secondary education, current initiatives include improved access to education and training, as well as support programs and networks for better integration. Discrimination in the workplace and the community also discourages Aboriginals from staying engaged in the workplace. We're working to address that problem too. Persons with disabilities face unemployment rates roughly 5 times higher than provincial average, and as such encounter significant challenges in the labor market. Some of the challenges we have to overcome include a notion by some employers that persons with disabilities can't contribute to the same extent as able-bodied people, and an unwillingness to make accommodations for specific abilities. We're also working on ways to better engage women and mature workers. We currently have a pilot project that has several staff working remotely from home. This is a particularly attractive option for women who have children and helps us retain good staff who would otherwise quit if we weren't flexible. We're hoping to greatly expand this program in the future as well. Other strategies including attracting stay-at-home parents to the workplace through flexible hours and getting more women interested in the trades as well. Mature workers, people aged 45 and over, I won't ask for a show of hands for that in the room, currently account for over 1/3 of the workforce. That's a huge percentage of the workforce. While the idea of an aging workforce and mass retirements is reason for concern, many experts predict that seniors will continue to work both for economic reasons and personal fulfillment. Part-time or flexible work arrangements, phased retirement or mentoring, and training programs may make it easier to retain older people in the workplace. More responsive pension plans may also make it more attractive for older workers to stay working as well. The Mature Workers in Alberta and British Columbia Understanding Issues and Opportunities discussion document was released on Tuesday, October 23rd at the Edmonton Economic Development Corporation's Experienced Worker Forum. The document is a resource for employers and policymakers in the public and private sectors. It also provides context and information to Alberta about the demographic shift and the need for change in social and economic policy. And I urge you to go online and have a look and participate in the consultations on that. And finally, some success stories. There are countless areas in which we're helping employers and workers. Just like to share a couple stories with you really briefly. In March, a Calgary engineering firm took part in a special recruitment session in one of our offices. Over 80 job seekers, many of whom had international engineering training, work experience, and credentials, attended the event hoping to get first-hand information about employment opportunities and advice on what steps they should take to become more employable. Another story is about a single man, I'll call him Jason, who moved to Stettler from the Maritimes. Jason was trained as a massage therapist and ran into some problems in the workplace and left his job and applied for financial assistance, which is another role that my ministry undertakes. Jason provided financial support for 1 month and told about some of our services the ministry provides. Initially, Jason was pretty torn. Do I look for a new job? Do I go back to school? He wasn't sure, but he decided to do some research with us and decided to return to work. He visited one of our offices every day, searching for jobs across the country. He updated his resume, used internet job banks, newspapers, and employer directories to find leads. He used our telephones and fax machines to contact employers, and we even gave him office space so he can conduct conversations in his interviews in private over the phone if he needed to. When Jason landed interviews, he took advantage of employment training and transition supports funds to cover transportation costs. Jason was in the office several hours each day for 2 weeks, and I'm happy to report at the end of that period he was offered 2 jobs, one back in Nova Scotia and one in Alberta. Even outside our own borders, we're making a difference. I think that's the point I want to make here again, that our issues, again, are Canadian issues, not just Alberta issues, and they're international issues as well. So I'm just glad that Jason obtained employment, and our office is ready to help him out. So actually, we're looking abroad. Last week, the Honourable Iris Evans returned from a 2-week relationship building mission in Asia, and she met with government officials in the Philippines, Japan, and China to promote investment opportunities as well as immigration opportunities to Alberta. So we're looking around the globe now, but of course, I want to emphasize, we're looking for Albertans first, Canadians second, and then we're looking abroad, and that will never change as a policy stance. So to conclude, again, we're experiencing some challenges. We face rampant growth here right now, but I think that there are opportunities that we can take advantage of and be very proud of the solutions we come up with. Through building and educating tomorrow's workforce and other initiatives, we have the tools we need to take action and improve workplaces for the benefit of all Albertans. This conference is about sharing knowledge and ideas, so I encourage all of you to go back to your workplaces and discuss what you've heard over the past several days. And you also have my ongoing commitment to listen to your ideas and provide support in any way that I can or my department can as well. So again, thank you for having me here this morning. I really enjoyed it, and good luck for the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Yuli. Iris definitely says a lot, by the sounds of things. Imagine, we live in Alberta, and you just heard the kinds of things that his area of government is doing to try and make Alberta a better place, because we can. And it's great to hear all the initiatives that are taking place. We have a few minutes now. If you'd like to ask Yuli some questions, he's ready, willing, and able, so step up to the mic. We'll give you a couple minutes for questions before we move on to the next speaker.
We're looking at it from the broadest perspective. The short answer to your question is yes. And I think what we're having the issue with women working at home is the easiest one to bring up, because it's probably the most facilitated right now. But now it's actually convincing people, again, that that they can do this and that we're open to having these flexible arrangements. I'm finding what's interesting from my point is some of the resistance to some of these opportunities. So it's open to people to, I'll call it word hoteling. Might even be a way of putting it. We're working closely with some of our providers like IBM, who have almost, I think, 2/3 of their workforce in this kind of situation now. They're working with us to give us their ideas, and so we're stealing ideas as we can to again, help better people work from home and for what works operationally. So again, what works for one area may not work for another area in government or in your business as well. So it's dependent on operational needs as well. But we're looking at it from the broadest perspective. We want as many people to take advantage of flexible arrangements as possible, because we want them to stay. We want them to come and work with us.
Doesn't look like we have any more questions. Thank you very much, Yuli. On behalf of the Alberta Conference Board, we're presenting you with this token of our appreciation. It's not a portrait of Iris, but it's a very nice portrait.
Thanks, Michael. Appreciate it.
Now, yesterday, Dr. Mike Percy from the Dean of the School of Business in the University of Alberta was unable to be here. He is now here and is going to take a few minutes to touch on his perspective of the province in 2020. First, I believe we have a 5-minute clip that we're going to, no, he's just coming up to speak. So, Mike, would you please come up?
Great, thank you, Mike. Good morning. It is a pleasure to be here, and I do apologize for not being here on Thursday night, but we had a 7 a.m. budget meeting, and it would have been career limiting not to have been at that budget meeting. So, and you can understand then the constraint. First, I'd like to say that this is truly a unique organization. I was talking to Wayne Taylor this morning. We were trying to get a sense of how unique. I certainly know in Western Canada, there is no such organization that exists that pulls together people in business, labor, and government, where you operate in a sense like a 2.5-day focus group, where people put aside their black and white perceptions of the world or positions on particular issues and discuss issues, modify them. It's like an ongoing verbal wiki, something that I've now come to know what a wiki is. So, but it is unique. And I think the beauty of this organization is that through time, it has managed to move from topic to topic. So there's been constant change in the organization. Well, at its core, it is a group that likes to discuss ideas, talk about policy, and then try and move that policy forward. And I know that the board has really been concerned with how to move that policy forward to close the loop. So that's just not a discussion that ends here, but it moves forward and has an impact on policy. And Don, I know, and the board have really focused on this. And certainly, what will occur from the discussions here and the voting that will occur tomorrow is that they've managed to ensure that the opinions and policies and issues that have been raised here will move forward to stakeholders in government and in other sectors to try and close that loop and have a meaningful impact. So I think it is a remarkable organization in that it has this core of individuals who constantly come. As Mike mentioned, it's a group from across the province with competing perspectives. So I do want to say that I enjoy being here. I think it's an honor to be here. In fact, my wife and I got married up here 5 years ago because we didn't want to miss the conference. So we did miss some of the conference, I have to admit. So the other thing I'd like to do is just give you my perspective then of the economy in 2020, and I'll keep it short because there's a very interesting panel coming forward. But when I look out at 2020, it's kind of driven, for me, my perspective is driven by what I view as the structural characteristics that are driving the economy. And at the end of the day, if we thought about 5 years ago, relatively few of us would have thought that significant engineering for the oil sands would be done in Korea or India. That being a computer programmer now meant that you were in a mature industry because so much of it will be done in Bulgaria or India or Korea. In fact, what is occurring, that anything that becomes rote or routinized, that's a Joe Clark word, ends up going offshore. We're living in an economy where there's global integration, products become mature remarkably quickly, and the only constant, to slip into a cliche, is change. And that as we look out there, we have to understand that you can't have an industrial strategy per se, because industries will come and go, and they will migrate as soon as their technologies become more mature. The product cycle, which we used to think a product would be new and you'd have a 3 to 4 year horizon, that product cycle now is a year, year and a half. So at the end of the day, the capacity to think of a diversification strategy or an industrial strategy makes relatively little sense in a world where everything is mobile and it seeks the least cost place to be produced, whether it's a service or whether it's in manufacturing. Now, you may view that as bad, you may view that as good, but the reality is, it is what it is, and as you look at policy, you have to construct policy that fits that type of world. So as I look out at 2020, I would hope that I would see a world where the focus is on the ultimate form of diversification, and here, this does sound like a plug for education, and in fact it is that the ultimate form of diversification in any society is giving individuals the capacity to adapt to changing markets. To teach people not to train them, but to give them the capacity to learn and understand their environment so that they can always adapt. And hopefully, whether you're at a university or K-12 or in lifelong learning, what you're doing is giving the individuals the capacity to critically evaluate their environment, to make decisions, but always have the capacity to acquire new information and move where the market moves. Because at the end of the day, the workplace is demand-driven, not supply-driven. So I would hope to see then policies of government that focus on learning and critical thinking, where we think of a Department of Learning that's K-12, post-secondary, and lifelong learning, because the reality is, if you're 60, you still have to learn, and you still have to acquire, because your workplace is constantly changing. So the notion that we had a few years back of a Department of Learning absolutely makes sense, and to the extent that we can focus on our educational system giving the people, individuals, the capacity to adapt to change, and rather than think of training, thinking of how to excite them about constantly acquiring information. And the reality is, it's very difficult to do that. And many of our ways that we test individuals almost test training as opposed to the capacity to respond and critically evaluate. So I'm in that business, and it's hard. And it's hard in K-12. It's actually hard in lifelong learning as well. But I think what we have to see, and I would hope to see by 2020, is government policy ensuring that we have an integrated learning acquiring system. And there we don't kind of have lifelong learning out there on its own on a fee-for-service basis, but is viewed as part of the fundamental role that governments play in providing individuals the capacity to acquire new knowledge. Because You know, our economy is rapidly changing. Nortel, which is a technological leader in Calgary in 1995, now is in Mexico and everywhere else, and it's moved a lot of its production offshore. And that is the way it's going to be. So for me, that is one key issue that I would like to see exist in 2020, where all policies are focused at giving individuals the capacity to adapt, wherever it might be, whether it's in Alberta, Nova Scotia, or out of country. The other thing I would like to see, and here's a clear example that I'm shifting into geezerhood, is that I would like to see a greater focus on values and ethical behavior and notions of giving back and citizenship. Because at the end of the day, societies work when you build up social capital and interactions. And historically, in education, we've tended to shy away from discussions of values, shy away from being aggressive in discussions of ethics and responsibility. And certainly, the profession of which I am a proud part, I'm an economist, and occasionally one definition of economist is somebody who knows the price of everything but the value of nothing. The reality is, for societies to work well, you have to have a common sense of ethical behavior and what constitutes citizenship. And somehow, as we get individuals to have the capacity to adapt, we also have to have them to an understanding of the capacity to participate. And that's why I think this organization is so unique. It's individuals who have displayed a capacity to participate, adapt, and try and bring forward policies that they know are important. So I'll stop there and now turn it back over to Mike.
Thank you, Dr. Percy, our conference chair. Now it's time for the panelists to move forward, if you would, please, and take a seat. Maybe what I'll do in the interest of time, I'll start moving forward with the introductions. I'm pleased to introduce both of our panelists who will be speaking on the theme of greening of business. Each panelist will make a presentation, and then we will open up the floor for a Q&A session. Sitting closest to me, good thing that she picked that seat, is Elyse Allen, President and CEO of GE Canada. In her role as President and Chief Executive Officer of GE Canada, and through her many industry and community involvements, Elyse demonstrates her passion for Canadian competitiveness in a global economy and creating a culture of excellence. She was appointed to her post in October of 2004 with a mission to grow GE's businesses in Canada and to advance the company's leadership in technology, media, and financial services. She is a strong advocate for advancing sticky pages, for advancing the country's science and technology base, competitive fiscal policy, and a strong ethics agenda. Aside from her work at GE, she contributes to these goals as Director of the Canadian Council of Chief Executives, the C.D. Howe Institute, the Public Policy Forum, and the Ontario Investment and Trade Advisory Council. She has served on the Greater Toronto Marketing Alliance and the National Roundtable on the Environment and the Economy. Sitting next to Elyse is Dr. Marlo Raynolds, Executive Director of the Pembina Institute. Dr. Raynolds has worked with the Pembina Institute since 1995 in the development and practical application of triple bottom line decision-making tools, energy systems, and strategies for sustainability. Marlo has worked with a wide range of clients, including many of the large Canadian energy companies. Marlo holds a PhD in mechanical engineering from the University of Alberta, a BSc in Systems Design Engineering, University of Waterloo, and a Master's in Management and Leadership for the voluntary sector, McGill University. He is also an adjunct assistant professor of sustainable development in the Haskayne School of Business. Glad to hear you're from Calgary a little bit. So let's start and first hear from Elyse.
Thanks very much. I noticed nobody asked if there were any Toronto Maple Leaf fans in the audience. the sound would have been deafening, right? Anyway, I'm delighted to be here, and as a number of the folks have mentioned, it is a unique group, and so many of the different policy groups I've been part of, I've not seen an organization like this, certainly out in Ontario, and I can say from my experience, I think it's the more we cross boundaries and get together working on policy issues, I think the far better the product that we come out with. So I applaud your efforts. and I'm very appreciative of being invited to be part of the session. I'm just going to take about 15 minutes, no more, because that was, we'd much rather have some time for questions if that's still going to be the case, and just talk to you a little bit about the greening of business. I'll give you less than 60 seconds on GE, just so you know where I'm coming from, because I know that some of you may not know General Electric. So we're a big company. We're around the world. We have over 300,000 employees. Our revenues this year will be about $170 billion. 50% of that for the first time will be, more than 50% for the first time will be from jurisdictions outside of the United States. In Canada, Canada is actually the third largest market. Probably at the end of this year will be the second largest country market for GE outside of the United States. We have over 15 manufacturing plants here in Canada, over 10,000 employees, and our revenues are a little over $6.1 billion US Canadian. Isn't that great? I don't have to distinguish. The other comment I'll make is just our broad product line, because when I talk about greening, that will help you understand a little bit about the businesses we're in. 7 major business areas. The first and probably the most relevant to what we're talking about, there are a couple of them, is really, first of all, infrastructure. Think about Siberia. Think about any new growing area that needs infrastructure. GE provides power generation. They need electricity to make things go. We provide every form of power generation: gas turbine, steam turbine, hydro turbine, nuclear power, biofuels, renewables, wind turbines, all of that. As well, when you think about infrastructure, you need to move goods and people. So transportation, aircraft engines, airplanes, we do all that along with locomotives. And then think about people. They're moving their goods, their services, you've given them power. The main thing that they also need then is clean water. So we're one of the largest water purifiers, water industrial folks in the world. And then you take that energy and you need to transport it from the source of generation. That moves us into our industrial businesses, where we do transmission and distribution, power quality, and we take the product right to the light bulbs that you see. Everything behind the walls and everything in front of the walls. On a plant floor, we do the sensing equipment, all sorts of types of sensing in a refinery, an upgrader, or on a manufacturing floor, as well as automotive, CAD/CAM type stuff. And then we move into our healthcare business. NBC Universal, which we call our sexy business. None of us that make stuff know what they do at NBC Universal, but it's great to have them part of the family. You get to go to movies and say somehow they're part of us, but it's fun. And then we finance all that. So we have a commercial finance business that basically if somebody wants to support an upgrader, or they want to lease large Caterpillars, or they want to do anything, put new equipment on their floor, we'll help them lease it, finance it. And if any of you have Hudson Bay cards in your wallet, we're also the folks behind the Hudson Bay credit card, Kawasaki Motors credit cards, and we do a lot of subprime mortgages in Canada as well. All that to say in that 60 seconds that when we talk about the greening of business, that means a lot of different things to us, and it also means a lot of opportunity for GE. And I'll start by saying one key message. Now, more than any time before, I think is the time to embrace the environment. I think it's critical for the sake of our planet, and I think it presents an incredibly valuable opportunity for our own economic prosperity. And being stewards of the environment and also being competitive, I don't think at all are at odds with one another. In fact, they go hand in hand, and they're very complementary. They are not mutually exclusive. You know, a lot of analysts and a lot of different media people and a lot of critics talk about the cost of meeting requirements around reducing greenhouse gases and other environmentally responsible objectives. And I think instead of talking about the cost, we really have to start weighing in with the opportunity. What does this mean in terms of opportunity for us? By developing efficient, clean products and services, we have an incredible opportunity to create new markets with these solutions, to evolve our research and our technical capabilities, to greatly improve our workforce skills, and to contribute to much more livable communities. And I think that's how we need to be viewing environmental care and protection, not as problems, not only as challenges, but as incredible opportunities. Why is it the right time to embrace the environment, to be thinking about greening business, to be doing it? Because it's the right thing to do. Certainly from GE's perspective, by all accounts, we see and agree with the dramatic impact that we've made on the environment. We understand it. We accept the science. But we're also at a place in our history when there's significant alignment with what's occurring around climate change and going green. And by alignment, I mean alignment in public opinion, alignment in technology that's available, as well as business objectives. Embracing the environment, going green, can drive business revenues and earnings. It can build a much stronger and a more competitive economy, and it can engage a broad cross-section of our citizenry. So I just want to take a few minutes to casually speak about things that I hope we'll come back to in questions. One is, what do we mean about when we say it improves business performance? Is there proof of that? Second, what does that mean about government? I don't think business can go green without government going green. And third, what does that mean for all of us in the room? Business performance, let me comment about that. And I'm going to use a very at-home example. And I think one of the reasons I was invited here today is 2 years ago, GE launched an initiative called Eco-Magination. And we really launched it because our customers asked for it. We pulled together our energy customers and our large, heavy capital industry customers from around the world. And in those discussions, what they told us, they were seeing huge pressure around this thing called climate change, lots more regulation, lots more pending regulation with respect to their environmental performance. And third, they were hearing from customers, from shareholders, from employees, a lot more opinion about the environment, a lot more demand that we address environmental issues as companies. So in response to that, we started to put together this idea of an initiative that would bring together what we had, our capabilities, to address our customer needs, and that was Eco-Magination. And the whole idea was to drive innovation, to drive new products, to help customers, and what do you know, we could also help society. We could do both. The key components of it were research and development, a commitment around R&D, commitment around new product introductions, a commitment to deliver that in the form of sales. So we just couldn't create the product. We have to execute and get the product to market. And also our own performance. How were we going to be behaving differently as a company than we did 5 years ago? A couple of lessons learned from this initiative. As we embraced the initiative, the first thing we learned, it is all about technology. The key to a sustainable future is all about technology innovation. And when we look at what is happening with technology and we think about greening of business, think about power generation. Think about the huge shift towards wind, towards tidal and wave power. Around the world, there is a nuclear renaissance, and it's coming back with, in fact, incredibly improved reactor technology. We have carbon capture, storage, and demonstration projects happening around the world, and you have companies willing to take big bets around this type of technology and this type of demonstration projects. But the one thing we learned was that to adopt this technology, for us as a supplier to create it, we had to have a market. And we learned that the customers were not willing just to buy green. It takes us a lot of money to put in to develop new products. We have to recoup that investment. So we want to come out with a premium. If something's only out there and there's 5 of them out there as opposed to 5 million, they're going to cost a little more. Customers wouldn't pay just for the fact that it was a green product. So what we had to do was find the win-win. And the win-win meant that we had to ensure that these new products are in fact better. They're better in terms of their efficiency, and they're better in terms of their operating performance, which means that the customer gets an immediate payback that will pay for the new technology. And it's green. So what's an example of that? It means that we make lots of gas turbines. We're one of the leaders in gas turbine technology. We can always make a more efficient gas turbine. Now it means that next efficient gas turbine also has significantly lower emissions. We just didn't go for the next generation to be greener. The next generation had to have the emissions reductions, and it had to have improved operating performance so that customer could still see a payback on his investment in the capital equipment. Another example would be locomotives. The locomotives today are producing 80% fewer emissions than the locomotives we sold 20 years ago. But they're not only producing much fewer emissions, they're also incredibly more efficient in terms of fuel savings. That fuel savings helps pay for them to adapt that new technology into their fleet. So what we learned is that it's all about technology, but we have to be smart enough to create technology that not only is a win in terms of performance, but it's also green and it's a win for the environment. Second thing we learned, and the gentleman Michael mentioned it, was we need a pipeline of products. We just can't have one product coming out. We have to have sustained product introduction. Because if we only come out with a one-time wonder, then we're not ensuring the sustainable of business going green and of our customers going green. If we let it be a fad, then it will be a fad. So we had to ensure that the investment is constant investment and that this year's product, we leapfrog it, we build off of it for next year. And so we needed a pipeline of R&D, and as a result, we're investing over $1.5 billion a year into R&D around new types of products. The third major learning we had from Ecomagination is that this is global. This isn't an Alberta issue. It's not just a Canadian issue. Around the world, the whole issue of climate change, going green, all the back and forth around this is global. It's happening everywhere. Right now, we have about 6.6 billion people in the world. It's expected to go to over 9 billion people by 2050. 80% of those people are going to be in developing and emerging markets. Look at those emerging markets. They don't have sources of energy. They don't have traditional sources of energy, and they want and need stuff. That stuff needs energy to produce it and to run it. And then what we're finding is that as we go and look around the world, there's a tremendous need to improve and desire to improve their quality of life. They are interested in the products that are green, that are good for their environment. As well, there's lots of new markets that we as businesses can serve and can bring these green products to. And the final lesson that we learned was that we had to walk the talk as a company. We obviously can't be out there talking and providing these products to our customers without making sure that we're adopting the technology internally. So I'll give you a great example. We have a lamp plant out in Oakville in Ontario. It makes T8 lamps. It's one of the most energy efficient lamps that you can put in. We didn't have them in our own plant. We're selling them to everybody else, but we hadn't put them in our own plant. We did so. We had less than a 2-year payback and a couple of $100,000 of annual savings every year by putting that plant. We're putting our head offices are all going solar. So around the world, we're investing in solar power for our head offices. So we have to make sure that we're walking the talk. What's the result of Ecomagination? We came out with this initiative 2 years ago. Last year, we had over $12 billion of orders from around the world for 45 products that are Ecomagination certified by a third party. By that, we mean these products deliver both operating performance that's dramatically better than the previous generation of products, and they have a significant, and that's all measured, green performance over what's out in the marketplace. Not only did we have $12 billion of revenues, last year we took over $50 billion of orders for these type of products from around the world. So around the world, is business greening? Absolutely. And I think what's really important, though, is that while the economy shows a win, and we have a win for the company, we'll have a win for the planet, which is absolutely terrific. But if a company tries to be environmentally friendly and can't connect the dots between being environmentally friendly and profitable, that's not sustainable. So what we have to ensure is that as businesses go green, they have to ensure that they don't go into philanthropy, because that's not the job of business. The job of business is to deliver the bottom line to the investors. We're an investor-owned company. You, as owners of pension, everyone else, expect a return for that investment. So we can't disconnect the dots. We have to make sure that if we're environmentally friendly, we have figured out how environmentally friendly translates to profitability. When a company does that, then we have sustainable greening, and we have a sustainable solution. I'm pleased to say that our Eco-Imagination initiative has shown us that that can be done, and it can be done in a big way. And the challenge, I think, to a lot of our other businesses out there, particularly medium, small, is how to figure out that equation in their market and in their industry. But we can't have, and now I want to talk about government, because business can't green in isolation. Greening of business absolutely demands a greening of the government. And what do I mean by that? Jurisdictions have a responsibility and a tremendous opportunity to go green. And to do it will mean building competitiveness that we haven't even yet to achieve, both as a country, as a province. If we focus on emissions reductions and we can focus on environmental priorities, we can get our house in order. I think we have a tremendous opportunity to position our province, this province as well as our country, around the world in a very, very competitive way. Think about it in Canada. Who knows how to manage resources better than Canadians? Manage scarce resources, which is what going green is all about. It's how do we manage resources that in fact are scarce. We have the talent, we have the entrepreneurial capability, we have the financial capability. All that means that we have the opportunity to develop here in Canada a unique position around being green. But to do so, we need a few things, and this is where we have the intersection between business and government. We need a national plan, and I say that carefully. What we need when I talk about national plan is we need some consistency of regulations between jurisdictions. In the states, we've got 50 states, each wanting to go green in their own way. We've now got 10 provinces all coming out with their own recommendations about how they're going to regulate business, how they're going to regulate new products. As a supplier, which one do I design to? I end up having to design to the lowest minimum because we want everyone to buy, or I walk away. I say, you know what? Canada's too complicated. I'm going to go sell to whatever the regulations are in Europe or somewhere else. So we have to make sure that when we think about going green as a nation, we think that we want business green, well then we have to make sure there's consistency of regulation and we limit the differences between jurisdictions as much as possible, both in terms of product design requirements and in terms of all the public policy framework, because only then can we drive the adoption of new technology. The second thing is we have to have realistic timeframes. People have to understand the economics of business. You know, you don't buy locomotives every 5 years. They last about 20. Those of you that in the oil patch know that, boy, the capital stuff that you buy in some of these plants, it's got a long lead time and it's got a long life. So we have to make sure that when we think about going green as from a public policy standpoint, we understand the economic framework of business and the timing of when capital is exchanged. The third thing is we have to have a value for carbon. We need to let the market work. And the market, if we put a price on carbon, that will drive some supply and demand requirements around the world and certainly in Canada. From a GE's perspective, we've promoted in the States something called US CAP, where we say what we call a cap and trade system around carbon is good. In Canada, I'm part of something called the Canadian Council of Chief Executives. We got 120 of us to agree. We didn't agree on cap and trade, but we found a common ground around at least agreeing on a market mechanism. That's better than nothing. And action is better than inaction. If we put a price on carbon, then that will drive investment in solutions that will take care of carbon. And so a price on carbon, let a free market work, is very important. And the final comment I'll just make about government is that we have to recognize the work that's been done. And I think, you know, I thought some of the comments Jim made last night, for those of you that heard the dinner, the investment that that the oil companies in Alberta have made in the environment and technology is absolutely world class. And quite honestly, as a person who's here sort of every other week, I don't think we as a province, and perhaps even as a country, appreciate the tremendous amount of new technology and the tremendous amount of investment that our large companies across Canada have made in the environment, in stewardship, and in exciting new technologies that can in fact be the future of this country. And I don't think we can overlook that when we're thinking about our public policy framework. So, the greening of business, it's good. It goes hand in hand with a greening coming from the government. And then the third piece is us. It's citizens. It's workers. It's people in our everyday lives. Are we engaged? How do we get engaged? And I think as we look around the world, as I mentioned, we have a lot of global touch points. Around the world, there is a demand for a greener society. And there was an interview called GlobeScan, went out to about 30 different countries, over 33,000 people. It said 90% of the respondents said that global warming due to carbon emissions is a serious problem. Now, I don't know about you, but how many other statements can we have 90% of the world's population actually agree on? And what's actually fascinating is that you go to the younger generation, and in fact, the younger generation is 2 times more likely than the public at large to want to support the environment. And we're in the universities and colleges right now recruiting. I can tell you, we are not being asked. I just got a call from our recruiter. They're not asking about salaries. They are not asking about their careers. They are asking about GE's responsibility to the environment, our technical solutions to the environment, and how we are a good corporate citizen to the environment. And that is the #1 area of discussion that our recruiters are seeing in the universities and colleges this fall. And that was true last fall as well. So what does all this mean for you? A couple of things. One, I think we should absolutely embrace the environment. It's a huge opportunity for growth, but it happens not with business doing it alone, not with the public policy framework trying to drive it, but in fact with everybody working together. Second, we can't be afraid of technology. In fact, the salvation, the solution, the way to our competitiveness as a country and as a company is all about technology. And I think sort of the old ideas that technology means less jobs, it means different jobs, it means exciting new jobs, and we have to really put our focus there. Third, we've got to get kids to stay in school. And I think Michael said it so well. You know, it's all about adapting to the future and being able to think and to be smart and to figure out solutions to the challenges that we don't know what, tomorrow brings. So we have to make sure our kids in Canada are as smart as they can be. And I want to urge as many of them in the room as possible to get into science. I want to invest, in the next great product, the next great technology. We got to have kids that understand science, that like it, that want to play with it, that aren't afraid of it, and that know where electricity and electrons come from. And so I encourage us as a nation and all of you to get those kids out there understanding science. And if they don't like science, then understand the technology of skilled trades, because we don't have nearly enough skilled trades workers to deal with the new technologies that are coming down. I got nuclear plants in Canada, large motor global plants in Canada, exciting, sexy aviation plants here in Canada. They're some of the best we have in the world because we got incredibly bright people not only designing the stuff, but building it as well and thinking of the next way to build it in a smarter way. And it's great, it's exciting, but I don't see the next generation. And so that's a big concern. And finally, in terms of a call to action, we all have to adopt greening in our own lives. So at the workplace, be on a treasure hunt. How can you help your business be more green? And at home, go buy those compact fluorescents. Find all the places that you can put them in your home. Go for that Energy Star appliance. Think about how you can reuse your own water, because that's what will drive it. The citizen engagement will drive business going green, will come from all of you wanting to think green and taking green action in terms of your own lives at work and at home. So it's a very exciting time. I think it's an exciting time for our country, and I think a very exciting time for business going green. Let's embrace it. It's a wonderful opportunity for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Elyse. That was very thought-provoking. Please save your questions. We'll hear from Dr. Raynolds, and then we'll open it up for questions for both of them. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for having me here at your very important conference this week and weekend. First, briefly about the Pembina Institute. Pembina is a nonpartisan environmental think tank. We grew up here in Alberta, actually not too far from here, in the early 1980s as a result of the lodgepole sour gas blowout. Since then, we've grown up to be one of the larger environmental NGOs in Canada. We're not 10,000 employees, we're 55 employees. But we have offices in Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton, Still Drayton Valley, Toronto, and Ottawa. And the vast majority of our staff are engineers, environmental scientists, a couple of lawyers, a few MBAs, some educators, professional teachers, and a couple of economists as well. Our work is very much focused on that intersection between energy and the environment, a very hot and important topic these days. We do a lot of work on a fee-for-service basis, both for companies and for governments and other NGOs. But we also do some public policy and advocacy work, which is what most of the media picks up on, and a whole education program through our greenlearning.ca program, which is a resource for teachers. It was developed first here in Alberta and then now expanding into Ontario and British Columbia. The topic, the theme of your conference here, the 2020 Alberta Transformed. I can't emphasize enough of just how important that theme really is. And I just feel that in our province here, we just do not have enough conversations about looking outward to the future. We spend so much of our time literally firefighting, thinking through how we're going to deal with the next infrastructure challenge, the next labor challenge, whatever it might be. We are constantly chasing our tails, it feels like. And it's important for just at times to take that time out, do some reflection, and look forward and look outward of where we want to go. And it's very clear that an important part of 2020 and Alberta Transformed is going to be the greening of business. But let's also remember that we've been here before. We've played parts of this record. You know, in the 1980s, there was very clear a green wave. You saw it in the polling, top of mind issue, the environment in Canada. That was largely driven by waste management, recycling. You know, we had the whole recycling programs and initiatives. And again, in this stage, Alberta was a leader. Edmonton in 1988 was one of the first major cities in North America to adopt the blue box recycling system. We have some of the most progressive levies on electronic wastes, which is helping drive small companies, small businesses to figure out how best to do the recycling around that electronic waste. So we've shown leadership in these areas before. I would put forward, though, that this green wave is much deeper, much bigger, more powerful, and quite frankly, I expect it to be quite long-lasting. Despite all of the concerns and very valid concerns around security issues, 9/11, we have seen this environmental, sort of just mandate really come forward very, very strongly. And it's very quickly, environmental performance, environmental concern, greening business is essentially deadlocked and linked to one's performance on reducing greenhouse gas pollution. It is probably the single greatest environmental challenge that we face. The scientific consensus over the science behind global warming is overwhelming. And so environmental performance is going to be equated to how you reduce or actually eliminate greenhouse gas pollution. And this is going to transform and affect how we think about business and how we think about the economy and how we think about policy in Alberta. We've seen a lot of conferences, themes, pundits, opinion leaders writing about this. Last week, you see, you can't open up any newspaper without having an environmental story or environmental issue in there. Jeffrey Simpson's article or column last week in the Globe, the title of it was, "On the Cusp of a New Industrial Revolution, a Green One." You know, something that we've been kind of complaining and whining about and thinking would be coming for many, many years. But we're seeing, you know, venture capitalists, we're seeing RSP, mutual fund brokers, really focusing on the green revolution. We're seeing a real transformation in a lot of small European companies, some of the larger European companies, really taking this on. And the way Jeffrey Simpson's, you know, focusing in on what this industrial revolution is going to look like is that this new industrial revolution will reorganize industrial society without the reliance on fossil fuels, or at least the way we use them. Without the reliance on fossil fuels, or at least the way we use them. So where does that leave us in Alberta? Well, I, you know, would be the first to admit and first to say that by 2020, we are still going to be using a lot of fossil fuels. I mean, it's only, what, 12, 13 years away. But by the year 2020, for Alberta to still be, you know, the center of excellence around innovation on energy, the focus for capital investment, a major competitive player in a global economy, we will need to transform our thinking on how we are extracting and how we are using our fossil fuels. And this really does mean deep reductions in greenhouse gas pollution. We're not talking about just playing on the margins here. I mean, we're talking, when you look at the science on this stuff, if by 2050, globally, we're not on track of a 50% reduction against the 1990 baseline, we're going to see a pretty significant transformation in the global climate. And that will have an incredibly negative effect on business and all of our organizations. So if we need to be thinking in Alberta, facing this challenge, we've got on one hand, we're a fossil fuel-based economy. On the other hand, we've got to make deep reductions. How do we bring these two together? Well, what if I told you that by 2020, we took a vision of a carbon-neutral oil sands, net zero greenhouse gas emissions in the oil sands? You know, what would that look like? I mean, first of all, think about the story we'd be able to tell. Yes, we are developing the second largest fossil fuel resource, oil resource in the world, but we are doing it and eliminating greenhouse gas pollution. I mean, that is a story to be proud of. That is a story to be able to, you know, nose up in the air no matter where we're at and be able to say, well, what the heck are you doing? We're developing oil sands and it's carbon neutral. When we did an analysis of what would it take to be carbon neutral and what would be the cost, we discovered that it would be on the order of about $3 to $5 per barrel of oil. $3 to $5 per barrel of oil. Now, I'm not saying that's inconsequential. That is a significant. That's a pretty important cost. It's not zero. But if we look at what's at stake and what the value out of that, I would say for $3 to $5 a barrel of oil to become carbon neutral by 2020, why aren't we doing it? And first of all, how would you go about doing it? Luckily, we have this energy resource, and we have it sitting on a sedimentary basin that is ideal for carbon capture and sequestration. Now, not every environmental group in Canada supports carbon capture sequestration, but from our perspective, if we're serious about getting CO2 and keeping it from the atmosphere, we do need to deal with some end-of-pipe pollution mitigation options such as carbon capture sequestration. This basically means we're putting it deep underground. The technology is very rapidly evolving in the area of carbon capture sequestration. All the pieces are out there. We need to assemble it. We need to be able to make it happen. We need to be able to focus effort on it. And more and more of the analysis on carbon capture sequestration is that we can manage it, we can do it, and we can do it cost effectively. It'll probably cost about $30 to $40, possibly $50 per ton of carbon dioxide. And to give you a kind of a perspective, I don't know, what is this, about 5,000 square feet here maybe? It'd take 2 tons to completely fill this room with carbon dioxide. just giving you a bit of a sense of what a ton of carbon dioxide looks like or feels like. We wouldn't be breathing quite as well as we are right now. But this is an area that Alberta really can lead on. We're taking a few steps. We need to push it across the finish line and demonstrate how we will become leaders in dealing with carbon capture sequestration. And when we put forward, for example, when we did a report on, carbon neutral by 2020 in the oil sands, we shopped it around from a few of the big energy companies and said, what do you think? How crazy are we? And Suncor picked it up in their 2007 climate change report and states, Suncor agrees that carbon neutrality is a desirable goal and one that may be achievable over the long run. We dance around it. That's as far as we could kind of get them. We can kind of say, yeah, let's embrace this full-heartedly. But what it does mean is we're seeing a coalition of some of the major energy companies in Alberta thinking through how are we going to make this happen, how are we going to address this. The second most important part is of Alberta transforming its economy and thinking longer term and how it's going to be part of this greening of business. It really lies on how we're going to go about diversifying our economy. I've only been in Alberta for 13 years now, and on a number of standards I'm learning that's actually, geez, you're almost a true Albertan now. But I live here, I love this province, I'm staying here, but we need to diversify this economy, and we need to find ways of looking at how we're going to be leaders in the energy field in North America. I mean, we have the engineering talent, we have the eyes of investment, we have the schools and the centers of excellence. We need to actually really transform that so that we start diversifying the economy into areas like biofuels, into areas like wind power, into areas like solar photovoltaics, solar hot water systems. A whole range of energy fields where we really can diversify our economy. So how do we head down this path, and how will business be affected? Well, I would put forward that there really are three key tools that are going to put us on a greener path in business in Alberta and in Canada. And Elyse really kind of touched on most of them, kind of stole most of my fire here. The first one really is pricing. We really don't have a choice. We have to start putting a price on our pollution, and we have to put a price on carbon. And I want to quote from the work that I think, Elyse, you were part of with the Canadian Council of Chief Executives around price signals. Encouraging business and individuals to change behavior requires appropriate price signals, and these signals can be strengthened through carefully designed market-based mechanisms such as emissions trading and environmental taxation. I mean, these are the major CEOs in Canada using the words environmental taxation. And basically what we're saying is we're acknowledging that if we are going to set us on this course, we have to start quantifying wastes, pollution. And we have to start thinking of ways of how we're moving price signals to increase the cost of things we don't want, pollution, and reducing things that we do want, employment. Why not put a carbon tax on of $50 per ton and recycle that back into reducing income tax or corporate taxes, getting the price signals right? There we'll actually start seeing a real market driver by closing the gap between marginal energy systems, alternative energy systems that do not have pollution, and more of our conventional ones that are still currently polluting. Because right now, from my perspective, we're actually subsidizing polluters. We're providing polluters a free place, free atmosphere, free water, and free land to basically just deposit waste. That, to me, is a subsidy that just should not be included in the system. So the price signals is going to be the first and the most important one, and how we do the tax shifting in there is going to be critical in the design. The second tool is going to be regulations. Price signals on their own are not going to do it, but our regulations have to be very carefully designed to be performance-based, environmental performance-based. So let's set some clear standards on environmental performance and let entrepreneurial innovation and the market figure out how best to meet those environmental performance standards. And so that's going to mean, things like fuel performance on vehicles, figure out how best to do it, or pollution performance on vehicles. And those are the areas that I think, so regulation is going to be key on driving some of the, second key tool on driving us forward. The third are going to be both the external and the internal market forces that emerge around sort of this values, environmental values that are getting stronger and stronger. Externally, we are going to see a certain number of consumers that are increasingly going to buy green. You know, there's always that small 5 or 10% that are willing to pay a price premium, but as soon as you make that price equal, you will see people moving very quickly to green alternatives. And it's not just about providing products and services that are green, but full-heartedly add more value. The other driver is going to be the internal one of where people choose to work. Employees and their values. And I think that kind of links us back to a theme here today of trends and future implications and opportunities for organizations in the workplace. It's very clear that salaries are just no longer enough. And let me guarantee working in a nonprofit voluntary sector, I would not be able to keep 55 people if salaries were the only thing that kept them there. More and more we're seeing a value-based, the desire to seek out and attain value-based work. And environment is going to be one of those values. And within that, is performance on reducing greenhouse gas emissions is going to be attracted to that value. And I think it's going to really affect our ability in Alberta and in Canada to attract and retain top talent, is our performance on the environment. So what can you do? I mean, first of all, I would say start a conversation with your employees. What can your business do? How can it seek becoming carbon neutral? We're actually running a number of workshops in British Columbia with a major credit union, Van City, with small, medium enterprises of holding workshops with their employees of what can your company do to actually become carbon neutral. And thinking through just what would it look like to be carbon neutral. And it's amazing those conversations that you can have with employees when you start bringing out the environmental lens. We do a lot of work training engineers, mostly in Calgary and mostly in the energy companies, where a lot of the engineers have been gone through again and again sort of value-based engineering. How can we just squeeze out an extra cost element, a capital cost, an operating cost out of the design of our facility? Well, that gets pretty boring and mundane at a certain stage. What we do is we come in and say, let's look at the design and the engineering of this from an environmental perspective. And the eyes just totally change. You start actually really seeing some creativity. They start approaching these design challenges through the environmental lens. And they actually very quickly discover that they're also achieving economic benefits through reduced fuel consumption, energy efficiency, lower maintenance, better products, better services. So, get your employees involved, get them outside as well. And finally, I would really encourage you to learn all that you possibly can about the science of climate change, about the risks, about the business opportunities, because I'm quite confident the more we're hearing from all the major companies and all the major leaders in the corporate sector, that this is a major business issue, if not the major business issue for the next decade. And so for Alberta to be transformed in 2020, we will need to fully and truly incorporate fighting global warming and taking deep reductions, both in our economy and in the policies that we move forward here in the province. So thank you very much. I hope we have some good questions, because there are diverse opinions in this field. And in a crowd like this, with the diversity in this crowd, it's really important to kind of stimulate some of that conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marlo and Elyse. We are running a little tight in time, so we'll take a couple of questions from the audience. So the first two at the mic are the first two questions and only questions we'll hear. I will ask both Marlo and Elyse to hang around during the break period, and maybe those who don't get to ask their questions can come up and ask them personally. Question 1. At the mic.
My name is Martyn Piper. My company is Coaching Works, and my question relates to creating the conditions under which the sort of innovation we're talking about can actually flourish. The sort of conditions which produce not only the best in terms of innovation, but also in the more orthodox economic metrics, and in terms of the way in which employees experience the greatest personal satisfaction. And my research very clearly indicates that the only way to achieve really superlative results is through a model of enlightened management, whereas what is much more common and probably experienced by most in this room is the command and control model. And my question is, how best do you see us transitioning from command and control to enlightened management so we can achieve all of the things that you've both been talking about faster?
Is that on? Okay. I can't, agree with you more. I mean, I think we have, certainly through our company at GE, we've made lots of mistakes, but we've had lots of wins as well, and we have many best practices to learn from. And I think, as in most cases, sharing what works with one another is the best way to sort of get change to happen, is when people see how to win. We have an aviation plant in Quebec that's actually self-directed. We have over 700 people, and it's all cell management, and it's a fascinating plant and is one of the most exciting and productive plants in the GE system in the world. We're modeling that plant in other plants around the world because we've seen how much they embrace technology and everything else. But I think you're right, and I think that what we have learned throughout the system is that the more, just as you're doing here, the more we have everybody working together, that people, understand the challenges that are being faced. So there's a common understanding of the challenges, but there's also a common understanding of the opportunity. And if you let people go, the brilliance and the creativity and the innovation come from within. And so our management teams work very hard to, in fact, have teams where, the frontline workers are there really driving the objectives, driving the creativity. It comes from the front line. And I think we've learned that over decades of plant management. And the good managers, the best managers in the system, understand that their best role is to get out of the way. And we used to talk about getting the concrete out of the way. The concrete was the middle management. A lot of times you knew what you needed at the top understood the objectives and the strategy, and the front line knew best how to get there. And quite honestly, in a lot of our plants, it was getting the middle management people to open their ears and to get out of the way. And those are the best performing plants.
I'll just sort of add on that briefly. I mean, that whole notion of how do you stimulate and get innovation going, maybe it's always typical, the environmental NGO to scream doom and gloom, but, crisis is a strong motivation for innovation. And we either have a choice of fabricating some of that crisis in the terms of saying, here's a strong price signal, deal with it, or here's a regulation, meet it, figure out how you're going to meet it. Those are, or a company saying, this is our target. Now, engineers, frontline workers figure out how we're going to meet this target because I've just publicly committed on it and my reputation's on the line. Those are little mini crises that actually really do create innovation and stimulate innovation. I would much rather us create those little pieces of crisis that stimulate and drive than it coming from the outside of, literally hitting a few brick walls in terms of climate change and some of the other big environmental challenges we face. I just would rather we manage our way through this thing than are actually forced into that mode. So I think that combination of that stimulation of that motivation coming from that like a crisis in the sort of a small c soft crisis, but creating that space for good management and good innovation, and ensuring that we stick into that creative zone, not into that emotional zone. We want to be, on the leading edge, not on the bleeding edge of this thing, is, often said. So that would be the only thing I can really add or contribute.
Second question.
Yes, I'd like to first congratulate the panelists on outstanding presentations. And I don't mean this to be a technical question, although it's going to sound like a technical question. In reality is cap and trade systems work and work well. And because they incent firms to reduce, and they really create more of a competitive mechanism to get firms to aggressively reduce emissions. Both federally and provincially, we're using instead intensity targets. And I can understand at one level why we're doing that. Because if we try to set a cap consistent with today's emissions and gradually reduce them, likely the price that would emerge contingent on what future growth in the oil sands would be, would in fact preclude a lot of that growth. So if we use today's emissions to set a cap, it doesn't do much. If we use a level of emissions that we anticipate 10 years down the road from that and reduce and work forward, then there's no value today of those emissions. So I guess the question is, how do we move from intensity emissions to a cap and trade world, which I think sends out not only the right signals within our region and within North America, but ultimately is how we have to go globally if we're going to get the very large emitters to reduce.
And just so we kind of have some clarity when we're throwing words around cap and trade and intensity, what we're basically talking about is you have emissions in Alberta and we have products in Alberta. We can either reduce emissions on an absolute basis, in other words, put a cap on emissions for, say, industrial sector, or we can say reduce emissions on reduce the amount of emissions per unit of product, and that's what we're talking about when we're talking about intensity-based. I would, say the most important thing that comes forward is that you've got a very clear and strong price signal on carbon. And so I think there's still a debate of whether you go carbon tax or cap and trade system. We're actually hosting a conference this Monday and Tuesday. It's assembling 100 people from across Canada, everything from energy sector, finance sector, insurance sector, agriculture, forestry, very diverse. And posing this question, we've done a series of papers into it, is what are the pros and cons of a cap and trade? What are the pros and cons of carbon pricing? Pros and cons of an intensity-based system? And how do we design the optimal system to get the right price on carbon? So at this stage, from an organization perspective, we have not said we don't take a position on its cap and trade versus just a clear carbon tax. What's very clear is you've got to have the right price signal on there and how you're going to achieve that. With the cap and trade system, it's only as useful as the rules underneath that cap and trade system. If you have systems where you can purchase offsets within that, if those offsets aren't real reductions, then you're not actually really helping the environment. And so the cap and trade system falls. From an accounting perspective and an administrative perspective, a carbon tax is the simplest thing to do because we know the flows of energy. We have to report and account on the flows of energy. So those types of calculations are relatively easy. It also allows to get the consumer involved. So yes, there's a tax when we have to go fill up our gasoline tank on the carbon. In a cap and trade system, it's very difficult to say, well, how are we going to cap my emissions it's just too many players to actually be effective. So there's a lot of pros and cons in there. From our perspective, the intensity-based system is it's kind of like training wheels. We haven't really, it's not going to result in an effective long-term means of reducing emissions. We have to move off the intensity-based system as quickly as possible.
I mean, there's little I would add to that, except to agree certainly in the U.S., where we've been part of a group with the environmental groups, it was very clear that for business and the environmental groups to reach consensus, that group agreed on absolute targets and a cap-and-trade system. I can say that in the discussions that we've had in Canada on the issue across a number of groups, to Marlo's point, there are a lot of issues that people see, and I think legitimate ones, around cap-and-trade, and the simplicity of a carbon tax is quite compelling. I think at the end of the day, as somebody who wants to create technology, what we want is consistency. And I think the CCE task force of CEOs, what we came out saying is, at least let's agree on intensity, because the fact that we can all agree on intensity is better than where we were 5 years ago when nobody even talked about intensity. So to have 120 CEOs in Canada say, we agree on intensity targets, and we agree that that must lead to an absolute reduction target, that's huge headway. A, it's a discussion we never had, and B, it's consensus that we didn't have. What will undermine the effort is if each of our provinces choose to go at this a different way, and if our national government doesn't facilitate some consensus across our country on how we want to approach this from a public policy framework, which means we have to not all do what we want to do, we have to do something that we can agree to do, because some action is better than inaction. And as I said, when we talk about investing in new technology, if one of our customers has 6 different regulatory ways they have to do it in 6 different provinces, they're going to hesitate to adopt the technology because of the cost. And as a designer of technology, I don't know which one to design to. And I won't get a big enough market for any of them to make that investment possible. So the importance of finding common ground, as you do here, we need the same vehicle at a national level to at least find some minimums and common ground across the provinces so that we can move forward. And we can move much more aggressively with common ground than we can if we all do our own thing.
Thank you. The observation that I would make is it wouldn't have been too many years ago if you had a hardcore environmentalist and a big-time market-driven business person sitting on the same stage. There would have been some fairly significant sparks flying. It's interesting to me that we had a sharing of perspectives in a very aligned way that is all focused on the same goal, one, making our world better, but also making Alberta a better place for us to live in. So on behalf of the conference board, I'd like to say thank you both. Thank you to both of you. And we have the picture here of our mountains.
Oh, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A couple of announcements. I'll try and do my speed reading because I can see Dawn starting to beat up significantly. I have a couple of announcements to share with you. Right after this session ends, we have a break till 10:30, at which time you should be back to your small groups for your 3rd session. Once you complete your session, you will come back to this room at 12:30. The recorders, would you please remember before you come back for lunch to drop off your sheets so that we can compile the information that you have. You're reminded after lunch there will be a plenary session that will review small group resolutions starting at 2 o'clock in the ballroom, which is just outside this area on the left. If you look at your program booklet, there's a map in there that should show you how to get there. Don't forget to appoint a representative from your small groups who will speak to your resolution later this afternoon. Also, please take a moment to fill out the evaluation forms which are found in your program booklet. Just tear them out and turn them in at the registration desk. We really appreciate your input on the conference. So that just about does it, and we'll see you all back here at about 12:30. Thank you. No problem.
Oh, I went way over. I apologize. I get so excited.
Actually, if you check the eyes out there was nobody that was drifting.
Oh, good.
Like they were quite
I get so
engaged.
excited about it. Then I forget that, like, you know. Okay. Oh, great. Well, I'm glad it worked out.
Secretary-Treasurer, Alberta Regional Council of Carpenters and Allied Workers. Martyn immigrated to Canada in 1976 from Sussex, England, after working 4.5 years in the British Merchant Navy, and several more as an apprentice and journeyman carpenter in both residential and commercial construction. Martyn is currently the elected Executive Secretary-Treasurer of the Alberta and Northwest Territories Regional Council of Carpenters and Allied Workers, a position he's held since December 1998. He's a veteran trustee of both the Carpenters Pension and Health and Welfare Fund. As their website says, if you don't know much about the Alberta Regional Council of Carpenters or the United Brotherhood of Carpenters as a whole, you're in for a pleasant surprise. The Alberta Regional Council includes more than 10,000 members in 4 locals, including scaffolders, carpenters, millwrights, roofers, interior systems mechanics, industrial shop workers, drywallers, and floor layers. And they're affiliated with the 126-year-old, 550,000 member United Brotherhood of Carpenters and Joiners of America, which is North America's second largest building trade union, and more than 50,000 members are Canadian. Martyn's lengthy and diverse experience within the Alberta labor relations community has provided him with a unique insight into the challenges facing Alberta's workforce and the changing world of work. He believes that partnership is key and that everyone should profit from the construction industry. He joins us today to give his perspective on labor's role in Alberta's future economy. Please join me in welcoming Martyn Piper.
So Paulette has kindly offered to, I've got a number of challenges I'm going to pose to you and questions, and Paulette has kindly said that she'll deal with all the answers, so she'll be back up here after this. I think, just to sort of set the stage here, I was thinking how we can do this comfortably so I can be at my best in terms of this presentation, and I think it might be preferable if we sort of turn this into a sort of a union meeting. So you can heckle and throw things and clap and do all kinds of different things out there, and I'll feel a lot more at home standing up here than in a more structured and formal setting. And you know something, the real test of a good speaker is that the claps as loud at the end as it was at the beginning. You've done okay, so just bear that in mind when I finish. Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, thank you for inviting me to share some thoughts with you regarding the subject of the possibilities of Alberta's labour force going forward. On accepting this speaking assignment, I inquired as to what my subject matter was and what the Congress would like me to discuss, and I'm pleased to tell you I was given limited instruction, although I was asked to discuss from my perspective the issues facing the labour force in Alberta and what constructive and strategic measures could be applied to sustain and grow Alberta's economy over the next 12 years. I'm not sure what I'm about to present to you gets us there, but I hope it's a different perspective and one worth considering. Maybe somebody could help me here. I'm puzzled about the time period. Why 2020? Why 12 years? Is something going to happen in 12 years that I'm not aware of? I think in terms of the subject that I'm dealing with today, we should move ahead with bite-sized pieces, starting with 12 minutes, 12 hours, and so on, and working our way up to 12 years and possibly beyond. More importantly, from my perspective, it doesn't seem to me that the time frame is critical to what we need to be concerned with. The more critical perspective, I believe, is the question of, are we, the big we, collectively committed to doing something different, very different, or is that not really the case? As I thought about what I might say to you today, it was hard not to get caught up with some of my usual biases, and for some of you who know me well, know I have those, or ideology, as it were, where predictably I might split the room depending on some of the more controversial things I might have to say. That said, this still may happen, although that would not be my preferred option. I would rather discuss with you the possibility of a more enlightened and holistic approach to the workforce and all the associated issues therein. Whenever I am told that some group wishes to discuss changing workforce attitudes or topics with such titles, same old buzzwords used to be things like industrial democracy, mutual gains, approaches to labor issues, or workplaces based on meritocracy, and here I'm not using too subtle a code for the merit shop ideology. These discussions often boil down to some groups' ideological views, e.g. regularly recycled unions that are obsolete, unions stifle true worker involvement, and the perceived problem is that unions are too confrontational and so on. Now, I started by saying that I had an ideological viewpoint, my biases. With groups such as the one assembled here today, the truth is that there are numerous, varied and often incompatible ideological viewpoints reflected. I can tell you quite honestly that I cannot conceive of real improvements taking place in many, if not most, workplaces without real worker involvement in the decision-making processes. And this occurs best when unions are truly an accepted part of the workplace structure. I feel equally comfortable in saying that there are numerous people at this conference who cannot conceive of real improvements taking place in many, if not most, of our workplaces without the minimization or elimination of unions, which is the very opposite. So again, I raise the question, is we, the big we, collectively committed to doing something very different, or is that not really the case? Of course, when one talks about the workforce, it is made up of different groups, starting with union, non-union, blue-collar, white-collar, academics, professionals, as well as different types of workplaces, construction sites, manufacturing facilities, retail, healthcare, office, commercial, public, government, sector, and so on. There are also different players, men, women, older, younger workers, aboriginals, visible minorities, foreign workers, new immigrants, and so on. Now, taking all these differences into account, at the end of the day, what do we want or even mean by way of transformation of the workforce? Why do we want transformation? And if we do want transformation, how do we get there? The big we, that is. What is transformation anyway? My closest analogy might be my son's Transformers, and if you've seen those, they're little, horrible little plastic people. You know what you do and what he does, you know, he can transform one character into another by a series of plastic twists and turns. I feel it will not be that easy transforming the Alberta workplace, and I am not convinced that that is the goal we collectively seek to reach in any event. Is transformation just another and more current buzzword, and the all-important question as to at what cost transformation, and just exactly transformation for whom, and into what? Sure, there has been some positive developments over the last number of years from an employment perspective, developing programs and processes to employ groups of workers not previously considered. Visible minorities such as Aboriginals and women and young people are now afforded work opportunities not previously considered. Programs such as Trade Winds to Success, Women Building Futures, RAP and Careers the Next Generation, construction programs in this particular case, are changing the makeup of the workforce and the workplace. But why? What is the catalyst that drives these initiatives? Is it because we are short of labor in this province, or is it because we have come to the realization that all people, no matter from what gender, stripe, or background, have a rightful place in society, including our workplace society, coupled with opportunities for advancement, diversity, and meaningful work? The basic struggles for pay equity and employment equity clearly demonstrate ideological and gender biases, which we will get into later. The trade union movement has always promoted this type of workplace evolution for no other reason than basic human values. I think these developments should evolve as a matter of intrinsic well-being and not out of economic necessity. I start from a very basic premise. If we have to go to work to earn an income because we need money to survive, what prevents us from making that experience a good one, or at least a better experience than it often is currently? This is significant when you stop to consider the amount of time, that portion of our total lifespan, that we spend at work. Think of all the various dynamics that affect a person's experiences from a quality of life perspective. Terms and conditions of employment, compensation, diversity, the work environment in all of its social, cultural, and other meaningful aspects, including ergonomics, management, relationships, the very meaningfulness of work performed, and there are probably plenty more such aspects. Now think of all the other interests that exist in and as a result of the work environment. Some competing, some in alignment. Things such as private life versus public life, profit versus public service, the environment versus pollution, and other external influences such as competition, productivity, safety, public policy, trade deals, legislation, and so on, with this plethora of often conflicting interests. Given all of these perceived dichotomies, how can we tailor a workplace to meet everyone's needs and transform it into what? I think to address the complexities of the issues before us, we have to address a more fundamental question about our world. We need to take a good hard look at ourselves as human beings, as people, as families, as communities, and ask ourselves, what are our values? What are our beliefs, our tolerances, our own personal experiences? Questions of, do we have respect for one another? And then add to this mix the ever-present question of what effect difference makes. The diversity question, and significantly I ask, can we agree on what kind of world we want away from the workplace before we can even tackle issues within the workplace? Do you go to work with the same respect and values as you employ at home, as the way you treat your spouse or your partner, or your sons or your daughters? Do you treat co-workers, workers and unions as respectfully as you treat the folks at the local Chamber of Commerce, employer associations, community leagues, and volunteer organizations? Or do we draw lines in the sand, depending on tolerance levels or filtration systems, and deploy a notion that somehow the workplace is a different environment that allows us to behave differently in our relationships? Are we consistent in our approach with dealing with all people and the various entities that we come into contact with in both our professional and private lives? My sense is that if we felt really strongly enough and compassionate about the workplace, then why do we not see more workplaces that have daycares, real drug and alcohol treatment programs, systems for family support, the elimination of sexual harassment and support programs for those who have been harassed, as well as real and meaningful services that support all the diverse groups in our workplace? I'll tell you some truths about today's workplaces, particularly in construction where I'm mostly involved. Workers, mostly men, leave their families in Edmonton, Calgary, or other Alberta cities and towns, as well as from Newfoundland, Saskatchewan, BC, or elsewhere, and go to places like Fort McMurray or other oil sands locations, mining or other industries in Alberta and the Northwest Territories, or elsewhere for long periods of time. This can be anywhere from 10 to 24 days. These workers live in camps with not much to do except for periods of 10 hours to work, except for periods of 10 hours a day or for up to 24 days. In the camps, these workers have to cope with isolation, depression, addictions, and other social ills on their own. And because they are on their own, social and medial issues and ills are fostered and exacerbated in isolation. Likewise, their families, in their isolation back home, and because of the separation of families, social ills and ailments such as drug and alcohol addictions, gambling problems, family violence, depression, loneliness, and many other problems are heightened by separation and isolation. There are currently no real systems of support for either workers or families in these situations. And you might want to consider that in the context of our military, whether they be in Afghanistan or elsewhere, where there's support systems within that whole environment. In our industry, I don't see that changing. Drug and alcohol testing is the norm in the oil patch and in many industrial settings. However, testing is not truly geared to rehabilitation, where the goal would be to creating a healthy and productive worker. Testing and the current focus of EAP programs is about weeding out and eliminating the perceived potential problem worker from the workforce, while being seen as doing the due diligence necessary to prove a case for eliminating that person from that particular workforce. And often I still see examples of where victims of sexual harassment in the workplace are blamed or go unsupported. I think the answer goes back to my opening, which is we all come at this from a different ideological perspective. For some persons, it's always about the money. What's the bottom line, rather than what's the effect on people? If we cannot move past this business as usual norm, I fear not much will change in the real sense of the word transformation. Challenging, yes. Impossible, no. When we address public policy issues, pretty much around our world, we tend to divide into three groups. There are those that are small c conservatives who typically espouse the values of less government, less regulation, less unions, less taxes, support for free movement of capital, industry, and workers, and more jail time and harsher punishment, including the death sentence for criminals. We then have that group in the middle, and for the sake of this discussion, we'll call them small L liberals, who espouse a bit of the left and what the right stand for. We then have those who view themselves as more socially progressive and support more worker and union-friendly legislation, put people before profit, seek to improve the overall quality of life through environmental programs, broadening social services, providing enhanced support to the less fortunate, and advocate rehabilitative programs for those charged with crimes. From my perspective, it appears to be difficult to cut across these ideological lines and find values that are based on some shared common ground. I think that environmental issues and the highly publicized conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq have the potential to cause people in all three groups to question their values and conscience. However, if these differences appear to be so great, how can we realistically expect our collective workplaces to embrace a different way of doing things? If the answer is we can't, then how can we as a group of individuals working together get any kind of alignment on the subject of transformation? If we can't agree on the starting point because of the biases built into each of us, then how can we possibly transform the workforce into something that benefits us all collectively as a people and as a community? You know, we are conditioned and we are programmed from an early age. And maybe the generations who are currently here, but more importantly who follow us, will be different. It is widely acknowledged that traditionalists born between 1925 and 45, baby boomers between 1946 and 1964, Generation X born between 1965 and 81, and the millennials currently 14 and born between 1982 and 2002 all see the world differently. Each has or will have a different generational values in terms of outlook, work ethic, view of authority, leadership, and relationships. And maybe, just maybe, those future generations are our best chance of success. My experiences have taught me to be aware of the rhetoric in the workplace and in my job working for a union. When I worked as a facilitator in the old Labor Department, my experience was it was incredibly difficult to get both sides on an issue, to get real issues and interests on the table. Sometimes I have felt a strong personal bond and meaningful relationships with people on the management side of the equation. But very often that only occurred so long as the union was seen to be by the employer as being cooperative and the employee was happy. When things started to get a little dicey, different attitudes set in. I'm sure the same holds true in reverse for the management folks from their perspective. Regardless, the issue of acceptance of one another's concerns and views, or even recognizing and respecting the various constituencies, can go a long way. I heard it said recently during a Labour Board hearing from a prominent lawyer from the employer side, who shall go nameless, who said, and I quote, "Who said workers have the right to strike?" From my perspective, that is akin to saying, who said employers have the right to profit? From my perspective, each statement is equally implausible. However, what that brief statement said to me was that we do not have the same basic principles that are agreed to between all parties. Until we are able to build that base level of acceptance and accountability to stand behind at least base fundamental principles, then I see business as usual and no real hope of transformation. Sure, on the non-union side and sometimes union side, HR people are continually dreaming up new ideas and innovative ways to try and get to be more efficient work teams. But is it about people, the workers, or is it about the bottom line? Not intending to appear to be cynical, I'm sure that many companies and government agencies have developed and implemented good, credible systems for all the right reasons. But unless everybody is convinced that the purpose is values-based, there will always be some cynicism about why such programs are brought forward. Can we improve on the current situation? You bet we can. You just being here in this room sends strong signals both ways that you have a desire to engage in the transformational process. That is, unless you are here for a weekend in Jasper to enjoy the mountains and the scenery. Now, I propose another possibility for your consideration. When I opened by acknowledging the likelihood that my comments may reflect my ideological viewpoint, and pointed out that everybody in this audience would likely have their own ideological viewpoint, including for or against trade unions. What I want to propose for you is that these, in our cases, ideological viewpoints informed by our Alberta experiences do not necessarily hold true for all places, or even all places or provinces in Canada. For example, It is often said that Alberta labor legislation is less favorable to unions than in other provinces. And I would suggest this is also true with respect to many places in the world. It is also said that how our labor legislation is interpreted by the Labor Relations Board of Alberta less favorably to unions and workers in Alberta than is true for many other places. An example of what I'm saying is certainly true in many of the countries of continental Europe, such as France, Italy, and Germany, where unions are the norm and accepted as legitimate representatives of workers and considered partners in the economic processes of the workplace and those nations in general. This is demonstrated by the differences in how we treat presumptions about unions. In Alberta, the presumption is that there are no unions in the workplace unless a majority of workers in a particular workplace agitate for and successfully organize a union, certify a union. In places such as Germany and France, the presumption is that there are unions in every sizable workforce unless workers agitate for, to vote, and remove the union. This is a difference in outlook and ideology. I say to you that it cannot be a given that a union in a workplace must be bad or a negative thing. This requires a change in how we see society, in how Alberta views unions and their roles, as well as workers' rights. Another example would be the announcement 2 weeks ago by the CAW and Magna, which was explained in a joint statement in the Globe and Mail written by Buzz Hargrove of the CAW and Frank Stronach of Magna. The plan is this. Magna has invited the CAW to organize all of its workforces, all of Magna's workforces in Canada. Representation votes will be held and supported by both the company and the union. In return, the parties would enter into a national agreement covering all of the workplaces that vote union with unique provisions about working jointly to foster a cooperative workplace that would meet the needs of workers to have a union speak on their behalf and represent them and improve productivity and profitability for the company. This demonstrates that parties can think about these questions differently in a way that doesn't require animosity, hatred, or distrust for unions. Another interesting note was that in the same day's Globe and Mail, there was an article about what happens when a union certifies a smaller workplace. An example was discussed where the employer stated he felt betrayed by employees and other such sentiments. This was also in Ontario, where the CAW and Magna agreement took place. Anyway, on the small workplace getting certified, the Globe and Mail interviewed a management lawyer from a large Ontario firm, Gervais, Borden, and Landis, who said that when employers come to him in circumstances where their workforce is being organized by a union, his advice includes that studies show that a functional union workplace can lead to increased productivity and greater workplace stability. We do not typically see such an attitude on the part of employer-side lawyers in Alberta. It has always seemed to me that any company that has a problem retaining employees, which has to be particularly true in Alberta currently, the best way to do this is by ensuring that workers are happy and feel that they are a valued part of the enterprise. As the examples I have given demonstrate, and these are only two from one paper 2 weeks ago, a functional and healthy partnership with unions is likely to accomplish all those things. So when I spoke of the problems facing companies, government, workers, and their families in Alberta, the issue of Alberta's labor force going forward, I want to ask all of you to try and think differently about what union and employer partnerships are and what they can mean to the future of Alberta workforce. If we can all agree to work towards creating a new perspective on union and employer relationships, then worker interests can be collectively advanced and protected while simultaneously meeting the needs of employers and strengthening the future of the Alberta workplace and economy. Together, we can encourage labor laws and labor boards that do not hinder and unduly restrain workers from freely choosing unions as their representatives, but instead will present a balanced legislative view that will be representative of all parties invested in Alberta's economic future. We can find ways to do this differently so that we can jointly, as employers, unions, and government, feel strongly and compassionate about workplaces so that needs of workers and their families as persons can be met, including more workplaces that have daycares, real drug and alcohol treatment programs, systems for family support, the elimination of sexual harassment and support programs for those who have been harassed, as well as real and meaningful services that support all the diverse groups in our workplaces. Can we wrap our heads around a concept of perhaps family accommodation in places such as the oil sands so that families can be together, for example? If we are really serious about moving forward, attracting and retaining workers, and ensuring that those workers are healthy, productive contributors to Alberta's enterprises, communities, and future, It is incumbent upon us all to find ways to step outside of our ideological boxes, embrace change, embrace each other's interests as our own, not be dismissive to new ideas, but rather find meaningful ways to address the real workplace and social issues I have tried to address and move forward. I can tell you this, I have always been prepared to partner with anyone and every enterprise in Alberta, and I'm prepared to listen to any of you discuss how we can improve on Alberta's workplaces so that both workers and companies can become stable, functional, healthy, productive, and profitable enterprises. Thank you.
Thank you, Martyn, for sharing your perspectives on labor's role in Alberta's future economy. We won't be having a question and answer session, but would encourage those who would like to speak with Martyn to come up during the upcoming break that we're having. At this time, I would like to present you with a gift on behalf of all of us. Thanks again. And if I could have your attention just for one more minute for 3 or 4 announcements. We'll be having a draw at dinner for 5 gifts from Taylor Financial Group, and they have a booth out in the entrance. They've got a gift certificate for $50 to the Fairmont Properties and 4 really lovely fleece blankets. The Ethical Funds Company, SRI Company, and Socially Responsible Investments are sponsors of that. They're suggesting that I understand there's a glass bowl at the back. If you could put your business card in there, they'll be drawn today, this afternoon, and then we'll give the gifts at dinner. If you don't have a business card, just write your name and a contact number on a piece of paper. A friendly reminder about the evaluation forms that are in the program booklet. If you could please remember to fill them out and turn them in at the registration desk. And the note that the main plenary session will start promptly at 2 o'clock in the ballroom just to the left, out the main doors. And of course, Dawn would like you to know that you're invited to attend the annual general meeting taking place in Pyramid A in the lower level of this building. That will start shortly after 4 and go until about 4:45. And finally, we'll see you back here at 6:30 for presentations, dinner, and entertainment. See you then.